Best reaction. Rare moments royal guards break character grinning squinting face. Flags fluttered gently in the soft breeze, and the entire area seemed almost magical, like it had been taken straight out of a storybook. Tourists from all over the world were gathering at the gates, their cameras ready, their eyes wide with excitement. For many of them, visiting this palace was a dream come true, and the royal guards who stood at the entrance were just as much a part of the attraction as the palace itself. The guards were famous for one thing above all else: their incredible discipline. They wore red coats with golden buttons, shiny black boots, and tall black hats that made them look almost like statues. They stood perfectly straight, their faces calm and expressionless, their eyes fixed ahead. No matter what happened around them, they did not move, did not blink unnecessarily, and most of all, they did not react. Visitors often tried everything they could think of to get even the smallest reaction: a wave, a smile, a blink. But it never worked. The guards remained unshakable, like they were made of stone. Children often pressed their noses against the iron railings, trying to get a closer look. Their parents would snap photos, smiling nervously as the guards continued their watch. Some tourists would try to take funny selfies, making exaggerated faces or silly poses. Sometimes, a hat would blow off in the wind or a bag would tumble to the ground. Even then, the guards would stand motionless, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Their ability to ignore everything was both amazing and mysterious. It made people wonder how they could stay so still for hours at a time without moving a muscle. Inside the palace, life went on quietly. Royal ceremonies, official meetings, and private events were taking place, but outside, the focus was on the guards. People whispered to each other, trying to guess what it would be like to stand in their place. They imagined holding their position for hours, in the cold or heat, with tourists doing everything possible to make them react. Some said they would laugh, others said they would get annoyed. But watching the guards day after day, it became clear that they were completely different from anyone else. There was something almost magical about their calm, composed presence, and that magic drew people in. The palace grounds were filled with the sounds of chatter and laughter, but the guards themselves did not respond. They were like silent sentinels, watching over the palace with unwavering dedication. Tourists would often whisper among themselves, telling stories about previous visitors who had tried funny tricks, like jumping or waving wildly. According to legend, some had even tried to mimic the guards' posture, standing perfectly still for minutes, only to give up in frustration. The guards' discipline seemed almost superhuman, and it made everyone around them both amazed and slightly intimidated. Despite the strict rules, there was an unspoken understanding among the visitors. The guards were part of the experience, but they were also human. People were careful not to step too close or do anything that could be considered disrespectful. Cameras clicked softly, children were gently guided away from the front lines, and most tourists spoke in hushed tones. Yet, there was always a playful energy in the air, a feeling that anything could happen at any moment. Everyone was waiting, almost holding their breath, to see if the unthinkable would occur, if one of the guards would ever show even the tiniest hint of emotion. Among the crowd that day was a family from another country. The father was tall with a cheerful face, and he carried a backpack full of snacks and cameras. The mother had a calm smile and held the hands of two small children, a boy and a girl, who were both bouncing with excitement. The children had heard stories about the palace guards from their school friends and were eager to see them in person. They had practiced standing perfectly still at home, pretending to be guards, but now, seeing the real ones in front of them, they were in awe. The little boy whispered to his sister, "Do you think they ever smile?" She shook her head, wide-eyed. "I don't think so. They are like statues." Even the people who had visited before could not stop staring. There was something about the guards that made time seem to slow down. Tourists who were usually impatient or restless found themselves lingering, watching the guards as if waiting for a secret to reveal itself. Street performers nearby would sometimes perform small tricks, hoping to catch the guards' attention, but nothing worked. The guards' faces stayed calm, their posture stayed perfect, and their hands remained still at their sides. It was easy to forget, standing there among the crowd, that the guards were not just part of a show. They had undergone years of rigorous training, learning how to control every muscle, every facial expression. They had been taught to ignore distractions, to maintain focus no matter what. Their role was not just ceremonial, it was also a symbol of discipline, respect, and tradition. And yet, despite their strict training, there was a sense that something deep inside them, some small spark of humanity, might occasionally peek through. The sun climbed higher and the day grew warmer. People adjusted their hats, fanned themselves, and took more pictures. Some tourists tried to make jokes or wave, hoping to catch a glance of a smile or a subtle reaction. Others simply watched quietly, admiring the guards' commitment. There was a feeling of anticipation in the air, a sense that something unexpected could happen at any moment. Everyone knew that the guards would not act out in obvious ways, but the very thought of seeing them break character even slightly was thrilling. As the family moved closer to the front, the children's excitement grew. They whispered plans to each other, plotting how they might be able to make the guards laugh. Their father laughed quietly, enjoying their energy, while the mother shook her head with a smile, knowing that the children were probably imagining something impossible. Yet there was no denying the fun in trying. Tourists often forgot that the guards were humans too, capable of emotion, humor, and kindness. They just rarely showed it. And so the day continued with the guards standing perfectly still, their eyes forward, their faces calm, and their posture flawless. They were like silent statues, guardians of a centuries-old tradition. Visitors moved around them, cameras clicked, children giggled, and yet the guards remained unshakable. It was a sight that left everyone amazed, a reminder of how discipline and dedication could create something truly extraordinary. But somewhere deep inside those soldiers, there was a spark of humanity waiting. A spark that might one day, if only for a moment, escape the strict rules and training to surprise the world. And everyone watching, knowingly or not, was waiting for that moment. The moment when the unbreakable would finally show that even the strongest can laugh, smile, or simply be human. The morning had turned into a bright, cheerful afternoon, and the crowd around the palace gates had grown even larger. Visitors were moving slowly along the iron railings, whispering to each other and snapping photos. Some were chatting excitedly, pointing at the guards and comparing notes about how perfectly still they stood. Others were trying to imagine what it would be like to stand there for hours without moving, without blinking, without reacting to anything. It seemed impossible, and yet here they were, living proof of human discipline at its finest. Among the crowd, the family with the small children had found a perfect spot near the front. The little boy and girl could see the guards clearly, their tall black hats and shining boots gleaming in the sunlight. The father lifted the children slightly so they could peek over the railings. "Look at them," he whispered. "They haven't moved once since we got here." The mother smiled softly. "It's amazing, isn't it? They've been trained for this. Years of practice, and yet they make it look so easy." The children stared, fascinated. They had never seen anything like it. Their little minds were buzzing with questions. How could someone stand so still? Didn't their legs get tired? Didn't their arms ache? And most importantly, had they ever laughed or smiled in all these years? The boy leaned toward his sister. "Do you think we could make them laugh?" The girl's eyes sparkled. "Maybe, but we have to be really funny, like super-duper funny." The family was not alone in their curiosity. Tourists all around them were experimenting with silly tricks. Some waved their arms frantically, Some jumped up and down, and some even tried spinning in circles, hoping to catch the guards' attention. A street performer nearby juggled colorful balls, tossing them high in the air with perfect timing, trying to see if the guards would flinch. But no matter what anyone did, the guards remained statuesque. Their faces were calm, their eyes focused straight ahead, their posture perfect. Nothing disturbed them. It was almost as if they existed in a separate world, untouched by the laughter and chaos around them. People whispered to each other, sharing stories they had heard online. "Did you see the video last week where a guard almost smiled at a kid?" one tourist said. "No way, really," another replied, eyes wide. The stories only added to the sense of wonder. Everyone wanted to witness something extraordinary, something rare that might happen at any moment. Then, a small, unexpected event began to change the mood. A tourist's hat, blown by a sudden gust of wind, tumbled toward the base of a guard's boots. The hat wobbled once, twice, and then settled gently on the ground. The crowd held its breath. The guard did not move. His eyes remained forward, his face expressionless. But a faint twitch of his eyebrow, almost invisible, made a few people in the front row giggle quietly. It was subtle, so subtle that some didn't notice it at all. But others knew immediately. A tiny crack had appeared in the perfect wall of discipline. A little boy, brimming with excitement, spotted the hat and picked it up. He held it above his head, pretending it was a crown, and ran in place, spinning slowly. The girl beside him laughed and clapped. "Look at him, he's a king," she shouted. Some tourists laughed along, but most were watching the guards carefully, eyes wide, wondering if anyone would react. The crowd seemed to grow quieter, the energy shifting from playful chaos to careful anticipation. Everyone knew they were witnessing something special, something that might only happen once in a lifetime. The family watched closely, holding their breath. The children began whispering to each other, plotting their next move. "Okay," said the little girl, "this time we'll be super funny. We'll dance and make silly faces." The boy nodded eagerly. They crouched low, pretending to be sneaky, and then popped up suddenly, waving their arms wildly and sticking out their tongues. The father laughed quietly, covering his mouth so as not to scare them, while the mother shook her head, smiling softly. The guards did not move immediately. Their training held them steady, their faces calm and controlled. But then something remarkable happened. One of the guards, a tall man with a long coat and a particularly stiff hat, let out a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. It was so small that at first no one noticed. But the children's eyes were sharp, and they immediately spotted it. "He's smiling," the little girl whispered, her voice full of excitement. The crowd gasped quietly, and a wave of laughter spread slowly among the tourists. They could hardly believe their eyes. A real, live smile had appeared on a royal guard. The small smile seemed to give the children confidence. They began dancing in silly circles, making even more exaggerated faces. The father clapped along quietly, careful not to draw too much attention, while the mother encouraged them softly. "Be gentle," she said, smiling. "Remember, they are still doing their job." But it was clear that the children were determined to push the limits, to see just how far the guards could go before their perfect composure cracked again. And then, it happened. A second guard, who had been standing nearby, let out a tiny chuckle. It was a quiet, almost shy sound, but it broke the invisible barrier that had existed between the guards and the crowd. The tourists who were closest leaned forward in astonishment. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every moment. Children cheered quietly, their excitement growing. The energy around the gates changed from quiet curiosity to joyful anticipation. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. One by one, the guards seemed to battle their own training. A guard adjusting his stance subtly, another tilting his head slightly as if to hide a grin, and yet another trying very hard not to laugh at the children's antics. It was like watching a secret competition between discipline and delight, a silent struggle happening in real time. The crowd watched, mesmerized, and laughter spread quietly like wildfire. No one had expected this level of human emotion from people they had assumed were untouchable. The children, noticing that they were making a difference, became even more playful. They waved their arms in wild, silly motions, pretending to fly around the guards. They made faces, twisted their bodies in funny ways, and even did small, exaggerated dances. The guards' faces slowly began to change. A twitch here, a suppressed smile there, a barely there chuckle. The tiny cracks of humanity were now visible to everyone. The atmosphere shifted completely. The palace gates, which had always been a place of silent respect, were now filled with soft laughter, wonder, and awe. The family could hardly believe what they were seeing. "This is amazing," the father whispered to his wife. "I've never seen anything like this in my life." The mother nodded, her eyes sparkling. "It's like we're watching a hidden side of history come alive. They are human after all. Even with all their training, even with all their discipline, they are human." The children giggled quietly, proud that their small actions had created such a big reaction. It was a moment they would remember forever. Tourists who had been quietly observing suddenly became more playful themselves, trying small jokes, funny faces, and gentle antics. Everyone was testing the boundaries of the guards' discipline, and everyone was careful not to go too far. The guards, meanwhile, continued to maintain their posture as best they could, but their reactions were undeniable. The small moments of laughter and joy showed that beneath the uniform, beneath the tall hats and stiff coats, were people just like everyone else, people who could feel, enjoy, and respond to humor in small, precious ways. As the sun began to tilt slightly toward the west, the crowd began to settle down, but the memory of what had happened lingered in the air. The guards, now more composed, returned to their usual stoic presence, but the small smiles and suppressed laughter had left a lasting impression. The family moved away, the children still talking excitedly about what they had seen. "I can't believe we made them smile," the boy said, eyes wide. "They are supposed to be statues," his sister nodded. "I know, but we did it. We actually made them laugh." And as they walked away, the family could still feel the joy of the moment. The palace gates, the royal guards, and the crowd of tourists had all shared a rare experience. A small, fleeting glimpse into the humanity of those who were trained to appear almost untouchable. It was a moment that reminded everyone present that even in the most disciplined and serious people, there was room for laughter, joy, and surprise. The palace gates had never felt so alive. What had started as quiet curiosity had turned into a subtle, electric excitement in the air. The crowd, once cautious and careful, was now buzzing with anticipation. Everyone had witnessed the tiniest of smiles on a royal guard, and now the impossible seemed possible. Tourists whispered excitedly to one another, their eyes darting from guard to guard, hoping to catch another reaction. Cameras were poised, children were bouncing on their toes, and the atmosphere was filled with a strange mix of reverence and giddy anticipation. The family that had been at the front lines of the laughter was practically vibrating with excitement. The little boy and girl could hardly keep still, their minds racing with ideas. "Let's do something even sillier," the boy whispered to his sister. "If one smile happened, maybe we can make more happen," the girl nodded eagerly. They crouched low for a moment, as though preparing for a secret mission, and then, with a burst of energy, they jumped up, waving their arms wildly and spinning in little circles. The father covered his mouth to hide his laughter, while the mother shook her head with a smile, marveling at their energy. The guards, of course, were aware of the children. Their training was meant to prepare them for distraction, for any unusual movement, and for hours of standing perfectly still. And yet, for the first time in many long years, the children's playful antics seemed to cut through the armor of discipline. One guard, the tall man with the long coat and stiff hat, had been standing perfectly still for over an hour. But now, a flicker of amusement crossed his face. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there, a hint of emotion that no training could fully suppress. A gentle ripple of laughter began to spread among the tourists nearby. They had been waiting for something extraordinary, and now it was happening. One by one, the guards began to show small human reactions. A slight tilt of the head here, a suppressed chuckle there, a tiny shake of the shoulders as if to hold back a laugh. The children noticed immediately, their eyes sparkling with delight. "Look, look!" the girl shouted quietly. "He's laughing," the boy joined in, clapping his hands softly. The father shook his head in disbelief, smiling broadly, while the mother whispered, "This is incredible. It's like we're witnessing something no one else has ever seen." Nearby tourists began to join in, trying gentle, harmless tricks to see what would happen. One man pretended to slip on the ground, recovering just in time to bow awkwardly. Another tourist twirled in a dramatic circle, holding a scarf above his head like a flag. The street performer, seeing an opportunity, added a playful juggling routine, tossing balls higher and higher into the air. Every action was small, careful not to be disrespectful, but each attempt added to the growing tension. The guards, trained to remain completely focused, were now subtly reacting to the playful chaos surrounding them. The tall guard who had shown the first smile tried to maintain his composure. He straightened his coat, adjusted his gloves, and took a deep, silent breath. But another guard nearby, younger and less experienced, could not resist. A small, quiet laugh escaped, barely audible but enough to catch the attention of the people closest. The crowd gasped softly. Cameras clicked furiously. Children cheered quietly, thrilled that their playful antics were working. It was like a secret battle between human emotion and strict discipline, and the children were winning. The family watched in awe. "I can't believe it," the father whispered. "They've been trained for years and now they're actually laughing." The mother nodded, her eyes wide with amazement. The children were practically bouncing on their toes, thrilled to see the guards' reactions. "Do you think we can make them smile even more?" the girl asked her brother. "Let's try," he replied. They crouched down again, ready to launch into another playful display. This time they decided to work together. The boy spun around like a top, while the girl waved her arms in exaggerated motions. They made silly faces, pretending to be funny animals, and even did a little hopscotch routine on the pavement. The crowd watched, some joining in quietly, laughing softly at the children's antics. The guards' reactions were becoming more noticeable. One guard tilted his head as if to hide a grin. Another let out a small cough that sounded suspiciously like a suppressed giggle. Even the sternest-looking guards were showing signs of amusement, their eyes twinkling ever so slightly. The energy at the palace gates was electric. What had been a quiet, respectful gathering was now a scene filled with gentle laughter, playful movements, and quiet astonishment. Tourists whispered excitedly, sharing stories of what they were seeing. "I can't believe it," one woman said softly. "They're supposed to be statues, and yet they're laughing," another man nodded. "It's amazing. You can see it in their eyes, they're human. All this time, we've just been watching the surface." Even the guards themselves seemed aware of the change in atmosphere. They were fighting to maintain discipline, to hold their position, but each small reaction built on the last. One guard adjusted his hat, a nervous gesture, while another shifted his weight ever so slightly. The tall guard, who had been the first to show a smile, now had to cover his mouth with his gloved hand to keep from laughing out loud. Every movement, every subtle reaction, was a small victory for the playful energy that surrounded them. The children noticed that their actions were having an effect. "He's laughing again," the boy whispered. The girl nodded, eyes wide with excitement. They started to clap and jump softly, careful not to be too loud. Their parents watched with quiet pride, amazed that their children were part of this unique moment. The tourists nearby, sensing the rare opportunity, began to cheer quietly, offering small applause and encouraging the guards in gentle, playful ways. Then a completely unexpected moment occurred. A small dog brought by a tourist wandered near the edge of the crowd. The children squealed in delight as the dog ran in little circles, wagging its tail and barking happily. The guards, who had been maintaining strict focus, now faced a challenge they could not ignore. One of the younger guards let out a tiny laugh at the sight, and another's shoulders shook slightly as he tried to suppress his amusement. The crowd gasped quietly and more cameras clicked, capturing the rare and precious moment. The playful chaos continued to grow. Tourists tried different gentle antics, waving scarves, making funny faces, or pretending to trip in slow motion. Each action was met with a subtle human reaction from the guards. A twitch of the eyebrow, a slight head tilt, a barely noticeable smile. Each one was a sign that even the most disciplined people had limits. The children laughed quietly, delighted that their playful efforts were working so well. Their parents smiled proudly, knowing that these moments would become cherished memories. It was in this quiet, electric atmosphere that the first guard finally allowed himself a full, small smile. It was not a wide grin, but it was real, genuine, and unmistakable. The crowd erupted quietly in delight. Cameras flashed, children cheered softly, and adults whispered in amazement. It was a moment that would be remembered by everyone present, a rare glimpse behind the perfect exterior of the palace guards. From that point on, the chain reaction began. One guard's smile encouraged another, and soon, several guards were subtly reacting to the playful energy around them. Suppressed giggles, tiny head shakes, and small, careful movements spread through the group like a quiet wave. The children danced with joy, feeling victorious in their playful challenge. The family smiled, knowing that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment when discipline and humanity met in a beautiful, unexpected way. By the time the afternoon sun began to tilt toward the west, the crowd had settled slightly, but the memory of what had happened lingered in the air. The guards, now composed once more, returned to their stoic positions, but the faint twinkle in their eyes and the quiet smiles hidden behind gloved hands remained. Tourists slowly moved away, still whispering excitedly about the extraordinary scene they had just witnessed. The children skipped along, talking animatedly about their success. "We made them laugh," the boy said proudly. "We really did," the girl nodded eagerly. "And it was amazing. For the people at the palace gates that day, it was more than just a playful moment. It was a reminder that even those who seemed untouchable were human, capable of feeling joy, amusement, and surprise. The guards' discipline was impressive, but so was their humanity. The crowd, the children, and the guards had shared something rare and special, a connection through laughter that would be remembered long after the sun had set. And as the family walked away, the father whispered to his wife, "We just witnessed history in a small way." The mother smiled softly. "Yes, and we'll remember this forever." Sometimes, even the strongest walls can be broken by a little laughter. The children skipped along beside them, already planning new adventures, unaware that they had been part of a once-in-a-lifetime event, a day when royal guards showed the world that even the most disciplined can be human. The afternoon sun shone brightly over the palace gates, casting long, warm shadows across the ground. What had started as a quiet curiosity had now turned into a lively, electric scene filled with anticipation, laughter, and wonder. Tourists whispered excitedly, children bounced on their toes, and cameras clicked non-stop. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The small smiles and suppressed giggles from the guards earlier had set the stage, and now the crowd could feel that something even bigger was about to happen. The little boy and girl were at the front, practically vibrating with excitement. "We did it," the boy whispered. "We made one of them smile," the girl nodded, eyes wide with delight. "But I think we can make more." They crouched low for a moment, pretending to plan their next move, then sprang into action. The boy twirled in a silly circle, his arms flailing wildly, while the girl waved her hands and made the funniest faces she could imagine. Their parents watched quietly, smiling and laughing softly, careful not to draw too much attention. The guards, of course, were aware of the activity. They had been trained to ignore distractions, maintain perfect posture, and keep their expressions calm and unreadable. But now, the playful energy surrounding them was impossible to ignore. The tall guard who had shown the first smile tried to straighten his coat and adjust his gloves, attempting to return to his usual disciplined stance. Yet a small twitch in his shoulders betrayed his amusement. The younger guard next to him let out another quiet, suppressed laugh, and a tiny ripple of emotion began to move through the group. Tourists began to notice the subtle reactions, whispering to one another in amazement. "Did you see that? He's laughing again," one woman said softly. "It's incredible," another replied. "I can't believe they're actually reacting." Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing every small movement. The children giggled and clapped quietly, thrilled that their antics were working. It was as if they had unlocked a secret, hidden side of the guards that almost no one had ever seen before. The playful chaos began to grow. Tourists, encouraged by the children's success, started joining in. One man pretended to trip slowly, falling toward the ground in a funny, exaggerated way before springing back up with a bow. Another tourist twirled a brightly colored scarf, waving it like a flag. A street performer nearby added juggling tricks, tossing balls higher and higher in careful, exaggerated arcs. Each playful act was small and harmless, but each one added to the energy that was spreading through the guards. One by one, the guards began to show tiny reactions. A subtle head tilt here, a suppressed smile there, a faint shift of weight as if trying to hide a giggle. The crowd gasped quietly each time they noticed, unable to believe what was happening. The children, seeing their effect, became even bolder. They danced in little circles, made funny faces, and waved their arms in playful, exaggerated motions. The father laughed quietly, holding back a loud cheer, while the mother shook her head with delight, amazed at how much joy a small family could create. The ripple effect grew stronger. The guard who had shown the first smile could no longer contain himself. He let out a small laugh, careful to keep it quiet, but it was enough to encourage the others. The younger guard beside him tilted his head, trying to hide his own amusement, while a third guard's shoulders shook slightly as he tried to hold back a grin. The crowd watched, captivated. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the rare and precious moments that would be remembered for years to come. Even the most serious guards began to falter. One adjusted his hat repeatedly, a small sign of nervousness, while another tapped his foot ever so slightly. The chain reaction was spreading. Tourists who had been quietly observing now became more playful themselves, waving hands, clapping softly, and even pretending to fall in slow motion, just to see the guards react. The guards were fighting to maintain their discipline, but each small reaction encouraged the next, and soon, the chain of laughter and subtle emotion moved through the entire group. The children noticed every reaction and were thrilled. "He's smiling again," the boy whispered. "And he's trying not to laugh," the girl nodded eagerly. They started clapping and dancing, careful not to be too loud but full of energy. Tourists around them joined in quietly, cheering, laughing softly, and adding to the playful energy. The palace gates, once a place of strict silence and discipline, were now alive with soft laughter, subtle smiles, and the unmistakable joy of shared amusement. A completely unexpected twist added to the fun. A small dog brought by a tourist wandered into the crowd near the palace gates. It ran in little circles, wagging its tail and barking happily. The children squealed with delight, pointing at the dog and laughing. The guards, already struggling to maintain composure, were now faced with an adorable challenge. One guard let out a tiny laugh at the sight, while another's shoulders shook as he tried to hide his amusement. The crowd gasped quietly, and cameras clicked furiously. The dog had become an unplanned, perfect addition to the playful chaos. The energy continued to spread. One guard's small, quiet laugh encouraged another to tilt his head, trying to hide a grin. Another guard's subtle shoulder shake betrayed his amusement, and soon, several guards were reacting in small, human ways. Suppressed chuckles, tiny smiles, careful adjustments of posture, every subtle movement became a sign of humanity breaking through discipline. The children, noticing their growing effect, became even more playful. They waved their arms, danced, and made silly faces, proud of the influence they had over the once unflappable guards. Tourists began to cheer softly, whispering words of encouragement. "Keep going." "You can do it," some said quietly. Others clapped their hands gently, careful not to disturb the guards completely. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of playful excitement and quiet awe. Everyone could feel that they were part of something extraordinary. The palace gates, the guards, and the crowd had all become connected in a rare, joyful moment of shared human experience. Then came the turning point. One guard, unable to resist any longer, let out a full, quiet laugh. It was genuine, soft, and unmistakable. The crowd gasped in delight, cameras clicked rapidly, and the children clapped and cheered quietly, thrilled by their success. The first guard's laugh had unlocked something in the others. One by one, they began to show more obvious reactions, smiles, slight chuckles, and even small, careful nods of amusement. The playful chain reaction was in full effect, and no one could stop it. The children danced around with joy, pointing at the laughing guards and squealing with delight. "We did it," the boy shouted softly. "They're laughing. They're really laughing," the girl nodded eagerly. "And we helped." Tourists around them smiled, some joining in quietly, adding small gestures and playful movements to keep the chain reaction going. The palace gates, once a place of strict formality, were now alive with subtle chaos, laughter, and the unmistakable warmth of shared joy. Even the more serious guards could not resist. A shoulder shake here, a suppressed giggle there, a careful adjustment of posture, each reaction encouraged the next. The chain reaction spread quickly through the group. Cameras flashed, tourists whispered in excitement, and children clapped and danced, thrilled to see the human side of the guards finally emerge. The energy was contagious, a beautiful mixture of humor, joy, and shared experience that connected everyone present. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the playful chaos slowly began to settle. The guards regained their composure, returning to their usual stoic positions, but the subtle smiles and quiet laughter hidden behind gloved hands remained. The crowd, now calmer but still buzzing with excitement, whispered among themselves about the rare, unforgettable scene they had witnessed. The children skipped along happily, proud of the small role they had played in creating this extraordinary moment. For the family, it was more than just a playful event. It was a lesson in humanity. Even the most disciplined, the most serious, and the most unflappable people could be touched by joy, humor, and playfulness. The chain reaction at the palace gates had reminded everyone that beneath the perfect exterior, there was always room for laughter, delight, and shared human connection. The memory of the playful chaos, the quiet laughs, and the small smiles would stay with everyone present for years to come. And as the family walked away, the father whispered to his wife, "We just witnessed something incredible." The mother smiled softly. "Yes. It's proof that even the strongest, most disciplined people are human. They just needed a little spark to remind them." The children skipped along beside them, still giggling and pointing at the guards, proud to have been part of such a magical, unforgettable day. The palace gates, the guards, and the crowd had all shared a moment that would never be forgotten. a moment when discipline and humanity met in a perfect, joyful harmony. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting a golden glow across the palace grounds, the crowd that had gathered at the gates began to settle. The playful energy of earlier had transformed into a quiet hum of amazement and excitement. Tourists whispered to each other, sharing stories of what they had just witnessed. Cameras were still held, though many were lowered, capturing the final moments of a scene that felt almost magical. What had started as ordinary curiosity had turned into an extraordinary shared experience, a moment that would remain in everyone's memory forever. The guards, who had been the focus of the spectacle, slowly regained their composure. Their faces returned to the calm, serious expressions for which they were famous, and their posture straightened to perfection once again. Yet even as they resumed their disciplined stances, there was a subtle difference. Tiny, almost imperceptible smiles lingered in their eyes, a quiet warmth hidden behind the tall hats and stiff uniforms. They were the faint traces of human emotion that had shone through earlier, a reminder that beneath the surface of perfect discipline, they were, after all, human. The little boy and girl, still glowing with excitement, watched carefully as the guards returned to their usual presence. "Did they just smile?" the boy asked, eyes wide with wonder. "Yes," the girl whispered. "They really did. And we made it happen." The parents smiled quietly, feeling a deep sense of pride and joy at their children's small but meaningful role in what had occurred. For the family, it was more than a fun afternoon. It was a rare glimpse into the humanity of people who were usually seen as untouchable, almost statuesque. Tourists all around were still buzzing. People shared whispered exclamations of disbelief. "I can't believe it," one woman said quietly. "I've seen these guards hundreds of times in videos, and I never thought I'd see them react like that." Another man nodded in agreement. "It's incredible. To think that all these years they've stood perfectly still, and today they laughed, they smiled, they showed that they're human." Cameras flashed as people tried to capture the lingering expressions, though many realized that the real magic was in the memory itself, something no photograph could fully capture. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, the family lingered for a few more moments. The children pointed at the guards, whispering excitedly to each other. "Do you think they'll smile again tomorrow?" the boy asked. "Maybe," the girl replied with a grin. "But even if they don't, we saw it today, and that's amazing." Their parents nodded in agreement. There was a shared sense of wonder, a feeling that they had witnessed something special, something rare, something that few people ever got to see. Even the palace staff, who had been observing quietly from a distance, seemed moved by what had occurred. The security officers and other employees exchanged knowing glances, smiling softly at the joy that had spread through the crowd and the guards alike. It was a reminder that even in a place governed by strict rules and centuries of tradition, moments of humanity and shared laughter could break through, leaving a lasting impression. The palace gates, usually a place of strict formality, had become a stage for something much more profound, a demonstration of the simple power of joy and human connection. The children, still caught up in their excitement, began talking about what had happened in their own words. "I think they liked our dancing," the boy said confidently, "and our funny faces," the girl giggled. "Yes, they couldn't help it. Even the serious ones smiled a little." Their parents smiled, enjoying the children's innocent enthusiasm. It was a small, perfect moment, a snapshot of pure joy, shared across generations and cultures, all centered on the simple, powerful act of making someone laugh. Meanwhile, the guards resumed their positions with impressive discipline, but they carried themselves with a slightly lighter presence. Perhaps it was the faint awareness that they had shared a small, unspoken connection with the crowd, a brief but meaningful exchange of humanity. Behind their stoic expressions, they had allowed themselves a fleeting moment of emotion, a glimpse of joy that they might carry quietly in their hearts. It was a reminder that even the most disciplined, most serious people could experience moments of delight if given the right circumstances. The tourists began to leave, but their excitement lingered. People whispered to one another about what they had just seen, sharing stories with those who had not witnessed it firsthand. "It's incredible," one man said, smiling. "We came to see the guards stand perfectly still, and instead we saw them laugh." Real human laughter. Children waved goodbye to the guards as their families moved on, still talking excitedly about the rare event. The palace grounds, usually orderly and silent, were now filled with soft laughter and quiet joy, echoing the warmth of the moment. The family walked slowly away from the gates, savoring the experience. The little boy held his sister's hand, bouncing on his toes. "I can't believe we saw it," he said, eyes sparkling. "I'll tell all my friends about this." His sister nodded, smiling widely. "Me too." "They're supposed to be so serious, but today they laughed." The parents exchanged a glance, smiling quietly to themselves. They had watched their children be part of a moment that would stay with them forever, a memory of connection, joy, and shared human experience. Even as the crowd dispersed and the palace returned to its usual rhythm, the story of that afternoon began to spread. Tourists shared videos and photos online, capturing the faint smiles and subtle reactions of the guards. People around the world marveled at what had occurred, fascinated by the rare glimpse into the humanity of those who were often seen as symbols of discipline and stoicism. The guards' brief moments of joy had created a ripple effect far beyond the palace gates, reminding everyone that even the most serious individuals are human at heart. For the family, the event became more than just a sightseeing moment. It was a life lesson. They realized that even those who seem untouchable or unapproachable are capable of feeling joy, amusement, and connection. The little acts of playfulness, the children's dancing, the funny faces, the gentle encouragement from the crowd, had created a bridge to the guards' humanity. It was a reminder that laughter, kindness, and joy can break through even the strongest walls, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved. As the sun continued to sink toward the horizon, the palace gates glowed in the warm light of late afternoon. The guards, once again motionless and serious, stood as silent sentinels, but the memory of their brief laughter and subtle smiles lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Children skipped along the path, parents walked quietly, and tourists whispered their amazement, all carrying with them the feeling that they had been part of something rare and special. The family paused at the edge of the palace grounds, taking one last look at the guards. "They'll always be soldiers, but today they were just people," the father said softly. The mother nodded. "Yes, and we were lucky enough to see it. It's a moment we'll never forget." The children smiled, proud of the role they had played. They had been part of a unique experience, one that combined discipline, playfulness, and the simple power of human connection. Even the guards themselves, though silent, likely carried the memory of that day quietly in their minds. For a few fleeting moments, they had allowed themselves to be human, to laugh, to respond, and to feel the joy of connection with the people they were sworn to serve and protect. It was a rare and precious gift, a reminder that no matter how serious or disciplined a person might be, there is always room for laughter, kindness, and humanity. As the family turned to leave, the palace gates stood tall and silent once more. The crowds had dispersed, the tourists were heading home, and the guards resumed their watch with perfect posture and calm expressions. Yet, the warmth of the afternoon, the shared laughter, and the fleeting smiles had left a lasting mark. It was a story that would be told for years, remembered not just as a moment of humor, but as a moment of connection, joy, and the quiet power of human emotion. And so, the palace gates returned to their usual rhythm, but the memory remained. The children skipped happily beside their parents, talking animatedly about what had happened. Tourists carried their memories and their photos home, excited to share the story with others. And somewhere behind the tall hats and stiff uniforms, the royal guards carried with them the knowledge that even in the midst of discipline and duty, a small spark of humanity can shine through, leaving the world a little brighter, a little warmer, and a little more connected. It was a day of rare moments, a day of laughter, and a day when the world was reminded that even the most serious among us can share joy. And for those who had witnessed it, it would always be remembered as a magical, unforgettable afternoon, one where discipline met humanity, and the simple power of a smile created a memory that would last forever.